Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Online Warriors podcast. A rare morning record for the three amigos, the three musketeers, whatever you'd like to call us. I'm Illeagle 86. I'm joined by Nerdbomber and Techtic. What's the coffee situation over in your guys' neck of the woods? Are you currently drinking coffee? Is it an iced coffee? Is it a hot coffee? Tell me everything you possibly can.
I finished my coffee for the morning, but it was a hot pumpkin spice coffee. And I'm not talking like a latte from elsewhere, like pumpkin spice flavored coffee grounds and my own coffee mug made here at home. Not quite as good though, but still delicious.
This was a pre-lubricated situation. We're not coming in with the jelly right off the bat.
I mean, I'm still, and I'm glad that we're going down this road because I, in the summer, transitioned to iced coffee. I am currently drinking iced coffee, but I'm contemplating the switch, considering that we're getting towards fall times. Nerdbomber, I don't know if you drink iced coffee ever, but considering that you're pumpkin spicing it, I would say that you have declared that fall has begun. Are you declaring that? Are you willing to declare that
yes.
to the listeners?
We went to Barnes & Noble yesterday, and we stopped at the Starbucks because the Barnes & Noble Starbucks, every time you buy a book, you get a coupon for $1 off. So, of course, you have to go to Barnes & Noble Cafe, which is basically Starbucks. But
that's a good tip.
We got pumpkin spice frappuccinos because you gotta, once they're out, it's such a limited season, you just gotta go hard. And even like at home, so our pumpkin spice coffee situation last year, and I know it's probably like grody because they're old, but I bought a bunch of K-Cups, like the bulk pack, like 160 pumpkin spice K-Cups. And like, we still have them. I'm not drinking pumpkin spice every day, but it's like a nice weekend, like delicious. So we have a bunch of those that we're still working through.
Now, do you consider yourself basic?
I do.
Do you remember that? Do you remember the whole
I consider myself
basic
basic
thing?
I say this every single year.
There's nothing wrong with being basic.
Yeah, like I mean, I don't like pumpkin spice. I still think I'm probably basic.
The definition of being
basic
is liking like seasonal things and comfy things. Who the fuck doesn't like seasonal and comfy things?
Yeah, go off. I've also, and I think I said this in a recent episode, but I want to make it as clear as possible. Everyone should go to Barnes & Noble. I want to like... Barnes & Noble, I think, had a bad stretch there. I think they're on the up and up. And actually, in a lot of cases, if you look at Barnes & Noble's prices, they're starting to come back to a at least comparable zone to Jeff Bezos. So, especially when you go to get the cappuccino and get $1 off, you're probably in business. So, if there's a Barnes & Noble in your neck of the woods, listener, I recommend it. I am willing to declare that fall has begun at this point. The main reason being that football has started. To me, that is the kind of the quintessential, okay, it is now fall. I'm not like in like apple cider fall yet, but I mean, I probably will be in the next couple of weeks.
I need to carve out time.
It's good times.
To go. There's like cider mills all over the Northeast, and I want to carve out time to go to a cider mill because I am feeling like it is starting to get chilly. It was really warm up until last week, and then we got like slammed in the face with fall weather. And so now I'm like feeling it, and like I could go for a good fresh apple cider.
The most exciting thing about fall. Now, I'm a huge football fan. I do like a good apple cider. I like a good chill in the air. Far and away, the most exciting thing about fall is the fact that sweater weather is returning. I'm a big sweater person, as I believe the two co-hosts here are aware. And I could not be more excited that sweater weather is coming back. So be on the lookout for, I don't know, sweaters. Because it's about that time. We have a big episode today. We're going to be covering Rotten Tomatoes, which we talked a lot about on the show recently for various reasons. And we're going to be talking about Rotten Tomatoes specifically today. We're going to be talking about some Nintendo news in two forms. One being some news on the Switch 2, which was apparently demoed at Gamescom 2023. And then we're going to be talking about a game that has been remastered. And you know, I tend to fall on the right side of remasters. I'm generally pro remasters. And you'll just have to wait and see whether I fall on the pro side of this remaster, which I've never played, but we'll get to that. I want to start with Rotten Tomatoes because we've talked about Rotten Tomatoes recently in a couple of different contexts. Nerdbomber, I know you in particular have a lot of bones to pick with Rotten Tomatoes. And in particular, I think you just aren't willing to believe in the critics' scores. The audience scores maybe, but the critics' scores no. First of all, is that a fair assessment of your current relationship with Rotten Tomatoes?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that, you know, critics tend to judge things a little bit too harshly. And, you know, it's funny when you actually will read their like long form reviews. There's obviously the number slapped at the end, but, when you read the long form reviews, a lot of them end up liking it more than that number would really, indicate. And I don't know, it just seems like there is this trend where if something isn't quote unquote artsy enough, you don't rate it as highly because it's not like quote unquote good cinema. But there are good movies out there that don't need to be this like artsy thing and then get low ratings and then the audience loves it. So like, I don't know. I think the number system all around is kind of skewed, especially when you're talking about, critics who are looking at it from a different lens than the average viewer. I don't think it reflects what the average viewer necessarily is looking for.
Well, and to kind of build on that before we even get to the story here, I was thinking about it after reading this story. Rotten Tomatoes is very interesting because critics, like you said, you can read kind of the long form little blurbs that they write about the movie, but the review they ultimately give is a simple duality of is it good or is it bad? I feel like that alone kind of robs Rotten Tomatoes of a little bit more like cachet in terms of me taking stock in the reviews. I mean, of course, then all those good versus bads get fed into what ultimately becomes a percentage, and the percentage is what you can use to basically translate it to a star rating if you want to go old school, 3.5 stars or 0 stars to 4 stars, that sort of thing. But I don't know. I think in things like movies and in art in general, there's a lot of room for shades of gray. You can like something for some reasons and you can dislike it for other reasons. So it must make it very hard for critics to even sometimes say this was good or this was bad. And you're kind of just making a base statement that loses a lot of context. So with all that in mind, Rotten Tomatoes currently, this was a story that broke last week, under fire. It was revealed that a PR firm paid critics for positive reviews. For a movie in 2018, a PR firm paid critics to goose reviews of the movie Ophelia, which apparently starred Daisy Ridley, came out in 2018. Now, let me be the first to say, the article goes on to say that it worked because it started rotten and eventually became fresh. It did not work in the context of the fact that I have never heard of this movie.
Yeah, so
even a little bit. So
it goes beyond just this movie. It's more specifically geared towards these smaller independent films, which like in my head, I was already suspicious of this when Nerdbomber said that Slaughterhouse had rave reviews, and literally it was only one critic and no one else had really seen it yet. So this isn't a surprise.
Still not rave reviews.
No, stop. Slaughterhouse is getting padded with these cash bribes, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, let me be the first to say, I imagine larger studios are probably doing much the same thing. Like this is a small indie movie that a PR firm that is named in this story from Vulture basically says, yeah, they paid reviewers $50 a pop to give positive reviews and goose it from a 46 to a 62, therefore making it fresh.
And the main difference is Vulture
it
is getting paid by these bigger studios too. No, I don't want to make these accusations, but yeah, I think everyone is going to be doing whatever they could to increase the, so to speak, value of a movie and get people to see it. That said, and this is something I have mentioned well before on the podcast, anyone should not take Rotten Tomatoes as the gospel. They should take it as okay, rough comparison. This is what we only use it for. We don't use it to pick movies that we're going to just watch. We use it to compare movies, one relative to the other, because that's a better approach to normalizing two movies that you can't decide between. What you should really do to pick your movie is look at the trailer, talk to friends, like watch videos. That's the true meat and potatoes of if you're gonna like it. Everyone has different taste. I love mashed potatoes, but you guys might not.
I will cop to having used Rotten Tomatoes to make decisions about watching movies. I'll own that. I own a card game where you have to arrange movies by Rotten Tomatoes scores. Like Rotten Tomatoes is now, it is a lot of fun. It's now kind of a part of our culture, and I do appreciate the discussion that's going on and being led by people like Martin Scorsese, who has come out staunchly against Rotten Tomatoes. Like, I think it is worth scrutinizing it as, why do we make decisions based on this, or should we make decisions based on this? Because as you kind of mentioned, Techtic, there's so much at stake here. Like this story, again, about Ophelia kind of goes on to mention that when it became fresh, it was picked up for distribution, I think after it was shown at a festival or something. It probably wouldn't have been had the movie been rotten. Distributors, and all the way down to consumers, are looking at these scores and making decisions based on those scores. So it's critically important that a movie have good scores in order to be a commercial success. I don't know the extent to which those two things should be tied together. If they should be tied together at all, it should probably be less. But another thing that this article doesn't really talk about, and another thing that has happened numerous times in the past few years, most notably, I think, with The Last Jedi, is review bombing on Rotten Tomatoes. People basically saying, I don't like this movie. I think in the case of Last Jedi, it was because it was quote unquote woke, but there really could be any reason. They will go on and they will essentially tank the audience score, because the critics aren't going to do that, obviously, but tank the audience score.
Or if they're getting paid $50, maybe they will.
Maybe the critics do. That's true. When I'm using Rotten Tomatoes, I tend to look at the critic score. I bring in the audience score if it's a borderline candidate for me watching it. I will say, too, with regards to my use of Rotten Tomatoes, there have been times when I have watched movies without looking at the Rotten Tomatoes, and if I had looked at the Rotten Tomatoes, it would have saved me time. Like, one of the more recent examples, I know I talked about this on the podcast, was a movie called The Snowman. I watched it blind because it had Michael Fassbender in it, and it looked good. It was like the worst movie I'd ever seen, and I went on Rotten Tomatoes afterwards, and it had like a 5% or something. So there are certain cases, I think, Rotten Tomatoes can correctly identify things that are beyond the pale as like really, really good or really, really bad. It's when you get in like the
middle ground.
Probably like 30 to 70% range, where it becomes really, really subjective and probably very difficult to, even in the case that you're describing, Techtic, like kind of grade two movies against each other and decide which one to watch. If you're looking at a 30% score versus a 60% score, it's very possible that it's wrong, especially considering that it's a subjective opinion. So,
and it's tough to know how to solve this problem, because if you went back 20, 30 years ago, there were like main staples in movie reviewing. Like, you had Ebert, I can't even remember other critics off the top of my head, but you had like specific review houses that would publish in newspapers. There were only a handful of them. You got a decent feel for like how the critic felt about different genres of movies. So you could like read a review and be like, oh, well, they don't like the same type of movies that I like, so maybe this review isn't going to hit home for me. But now, because, the advent of the internet, and there's so many different review outlets, there's so many different critics out there, it's hard to distill all of the information that we have down. And I don't know what the solution is, because the easiest thing is to try to come up with an aggregate score for all the critics, but it almost feels like we need something like an algorithm where, if you really care about cinema and review scores and finding something that's aligned with your taste, you could almost like rate movies that you like versus dislike, and then it would show you other reviewers who kind of fall in that same taste profile, and then how they feel about movies. But like I said, there's so many different critics now, I don't even know how that would be possible.
A good example too of this, you're going to enjoy the movie regardless of the tomato meter.
I like that instead, though. Can we just call it the tometer?
When I was younger, I loved the movie Underworld. That has a 31% on Rotten Tomatoes. That just feels not cool.
Yeah, I think everyone has an example of this. Like, let me look it up really quick. I believe the 1999 Mummy, which is like one of my favorite movies ever, I think it has like a 40-something on Rotten Tomatoes, and it is, to me, indubitably a better movie than that. Okay, that's a 60, but like, come on, that movie is now like a cultural icon. Like, I don't even think I'm being biased there. I think most people that see that movie love it. It's, the other thing about this, and another lens to kind of look at this through, is the fact that movies have changed pretty drastically since Rotten Tomatoes started, right? Like, we've heard so much about how the mid-budget movie, these days there are either big-budget franchise pieces or there are indie movies, and the in-between stuff is so much less prominent. I wonder the extent to which that factors into this. And the other thing about it, too, and kind of going back to how much cachet Rotten Tomatoes has, whether it should or it shouldn't. Have you guys ever seen on Twitter or X or whatever we want to call it now, there are accounts that will literally say like X movie that's coming out on Friday debuts with X% on Rotten Tomatoes. I see tweets like that all the time. Maybe because I'm like big on movie Twitter or something. But you will click it and it will say like, yeah, it has a 70% on like 4 reviews or something. Like it's I think a lot of the problem here is that people are looking at these scores without context of any kind. It's trying to boil it down to one number and one metric, which I appreciate, but at what cost? I think is like the general question. And again, kind of swinging it back to the story here, when PR firms and, like I said, most likely studios can game it like this, what value does it even have anymore? You know, where I think it's a very valid question, and it's a question you were asking, Nerdbomber, is like, where do we look, if not to Rotten Tomatoes, for opinions on what we should be watching? How do we cut through this and take this single number and dissect it and make it more targeted? It's a valid question. I think there may be a space here for another site or another, I don't know, institution, something to, like you said, kind of tailor it more to what a given viewer is looking for. There may be things like that out there already, but if there are things like that out there already, I don't know about them. They're not as culturally pervasive as Rotten Tomatoes is.
I just have to give a quick update, by the way. So Techtic was right. There's not a lot of critics reviewing Slaughterhouse right now, but it has a great Rotten Tomatoes score based on the audience score, which has over 100 users giving us that information. So
Sus.
Just saying, it's got a 92% audience score with 100 plus ratings.
Okay, I did just check your work. I mean, 71% on 7 reviews. That's better than a sharp stick in the eye.
Chrissy C says, surprisingly great movie that I would watch again.
But this is a really good kind of test case too, is like, this movie has been reviewed by 7 critics. Like, I don't know how to take that score. You know, like, I don't know how to, if I'm deciding whether to watch Slaughterhouse, I would look at the 71 and be like, okay, pretty good. And I would look at the 7 reviews and be like, well, is it that good if so few people have watched it? You know, there's just a lot of variables involved.
Nuance.
But that's a good word for it. What do you think of Rotten Tomatoes, listener? Are you a Rotten Tomatoes fan? Are you surprised by this news? Probably not. Do you think Rotten Tomatoes is rotten? There's a punchy question. Let us know. @OWLeague86 is my account. We have @OW Techtic, @OW Nerdbomber, and our main show account @OnlineWarriors1, all on X. You can also follow us on Instagram, I believe, @Online Warriors Podcast, ? You should be able to find us. And I think, are we still on Threads? Is Threads over? Should we talk about that? That's not a news topic, but is Threads still going on? Is it over? Do we even know? I've heard a lot of nothing about it in the past few weeks.
Yeah, we're technically on Threads. I have not been doing a great job. We were not getting a lot of traction on Threads. It's tough. I don't know if it's still a thing. If you're using Threads, please let us know.
To be clear, I was not grilling you on like, what is our Threads presence like? I was more like, is Threads still even going on? Or is it like a Google Plus situation where like it just kind of like had a big start and then fizzled out? I feel like I'd be hearing about it a lot more if it was actually like going on still. Someone can let us know about that if they want to hit us up on X. Let's move on to the Switch 2. Nintendo reportedly demoed the Switch 2 at Gamescom 2023. The main plot point here for me, I mean, you know, this was a closed door situation. We haven't seen anything. We don't really know anything. All we can do is speculate and say what we want. The main thing we have been told, based on this article, is that performance is quote unquote comparable to PS5 and Xbox Series in terms of visuals. Now, I will say that's a good start. I'm also going to go out on a limb here and say, in the context of the Switch, I don't know that I care. Like, is that for what Nintendo is known for what games it produces, and for what games people play on it, is that of critical importance? I kind of want that to be a think tank question here. And if not that, what would you like to see from the Switch 2 is, I guess, another question. Another major question that's outstanding is backwards compatibility, which we don't know anything about yet. But this is expected to come around in 2024 sometime. So we should talk about it now, because we'll know soon what it is.
So it being comparable to the PS5 is huge, right? Everyone who maybe was on the fence with getting a Switch is mainly because they want to see, you know, graphically beautiful resolution. And now what we understand is the Switch is actually doing some really clever things to achieve this comparable performance to a PS5. They don't necessarily have the hardware, but they're optimizing the way in which the screen and resolution is being portrayed to give you this gorgeous, expansive world. And what we understand was they've presented basically a roided out Breath of the Wild, and just it looked, you know, 4K, gorgeous on the screen. What is critical with that statement, however, is we've all played the Switch and we say, wow, this game looks really good in handheld mode. Will it look just as optimized and beautiful and, quote, comparable to the PS5 when it's docked? And that's something we still need to understand and really clear up, because as we've said, this is kind of what we've heard through the grapevine, and nothing has really been physically seen by us peons, so to speak.
I want to, again, I don't think, like, Nintendo games, and Breath of the Wild is a good example, like, they're not striving for photorealism in any way. So for me, the graphics isn't as important as, say, the solid state drive from the PS5. Like, to me, that would be a much more significant draw for me to buying a Switch 2, which, to be clear, I don't think I have any intention of buying a Switch 2 unless they come out and it like cures cancer or something.
You would never buy one?
If it
cures it's not that I would never buy one, but like next year, I certainly don't plan to. I just have no need for it. But yeah, I don't think the triangles are the important thing here. In terms of handheld, something else I wanted to mention, it has been, I don't know if it's rumored or confirmed that it'll have an LCD screen as opposed to an OLED screen. Now,
that doesn't bother me.
I was going to say, I guess I could probably tell the difference if I looked at the two side by side, but I don't know. Could I? Like, I think of the Switch as being such a different animal of like the performance specs of the visuals and the graphics and even the screen. Like, I don't know how important it is. I really don't.
The other piece of news that has sort of been leaked is that they filed patents for Hall Effect-like Joy-Con or joysticks. And so that's another piece that we've mentioned on the show with regards to other handheld gaming devices, their move to using the Hall Effect joysticks and how important that is for anti-drift. So they're continuously improving on what the Switch 1 brought us, and to just take it to the next level. And do you want to know what my opinion of the Switch 2 is? If you have a Switch and they can play the same games, okay, I can see your stance of, why would you bother buying a Switch 2? However, what the Switch 2 is doing by having these people clamor that it's comparable to the PS5 is they're now redefining what the next generation of console hardware is, right? We've already seen the PlayStation 5 handheld cloud streaming device. And so we know that the market as a whole has this huge desire to go fully portable while giving you high resolution. And the Switch 2 and its debut is being the pioneer, which in a business, that's where you want to be. You want to be ahead of everyone else, striving forward while, and I'm going to quote you directly because we've talked about this prior to the show, while your PS5 is collecting dust.
Yeah, no, and that's a really good point. I totally agree that I think the direction generally is and should be taking something like the PS5 experience and making it more portable. So if that's what the next generation is, if that's the defining characteristic of the next generation, I'm all about that. And Nintendo has the benefit of basically saying, hey, this is what people want and we were here first. So yeah, I'm on board with that. The other thing, going back to the Joy-Con drift thing, I will say that I'm glad you brought that up as well, because that is one of the few things about the Switch that I have, I guess, experienced negatively about it. That is a real thing. And like, I don't know that I'm like using my Joy-Cons. Yeah. I think just in one of them, but yes. So that is.
And there's third-party controllers that exist now that you can replace with, but like you shouldn't have to, right? It should just work.
Yeah. Yeah. It should be a little bit more robust than that. I don't know, Nerdbomber, anything you're on your wish list on the Switch 2 that has not been mentioned? I mean, it's hard for me to like sit here and be like, this Switch is perfect. There's nothing to fix, because I'm sure there is. But like, I don't know. My wish list is very short for what this could give us.
No, I would love to see, as we've mentioned, a little bit better graphics. One of the things that was a little bit frustrating, so Pokemon Scarlet and Violet was phenomenal. I really enjoyed my experience. And I know we talk about like triangles don't matter, but there was some wonky graphic stuff going on with that game that I think it definitely took you out of the experience a little bit. It was funny after a while, so you just kept playing and you're like, oh, ha ha ha, I'm clipping through my Pokemon, or oh, now when I put it on my TV, this looks like crud, but that's fine, I'm having fun. Like, I would like to just be able to experience that game without that sort of issue. And there is a noticeable graphics difference between high-end games on the Switch and the PS5 and the Xbox. And I'm not saying that, triangles is the most important thing, because it's not. But I do think that, especially with the advent of the Switch or the Steam Deck and all of these other handhelds that have shown that you can still have good graphic fidelity on a handheld unit, like, I just think they need to do something to catch up with the rest of the class. And so I'm hopeful that this will kind of address some of those problems. I do think, too, it'll give them more power and more options when it comes to their first-party games. I don't think anybody's expecting, like a God of War type experience coming out of the Switch, but if we got, say, like a Zelda game that could have full cinematic cutscenes with voiceovers that look like chef's kiss, like you're almost in a movie theater, that would be pretty dope. And I think it also limits some of the games that can run on it, because stuff like, oh boy, what was that zombie game where you parkoured a lot? There's Kingdom Hearts. But like those things, if you wanted to play them on Switch, you have to stream them. And like,
well, yeah,
that's not a great experience. So if like you can get that type of game to run on the
Dying
Switch.
Light?
Yes, thank you, Dying Light. Like those games are technically on Switch, but you have to stream them from the cloud. And if they can find a better play experience than having to stream from the cloud, that would be swell. So,
well, for me, the example of that, I guess, and I've never bought this game. I've certainly thought about buying Doom Eternal for a while. Doom Eternal you can get on the Switch. Do you want to? I do think that is, I don't know that Nintendo has any interest in carving out any space in that genre or type of game relative to the other consoles, but improving graphics would be a way to do that. Like if I'm going to buy a game like Doom Eternal, I'm probably not going to buy it for the Switch because it's not going to look as good. I'm going to buy it for my PS5 or PS4 at the time or whatever. So, but I guess I question if they're interested in that, or like you said, if they're even interested in taking a game like taking an IP like Zelda and supercharging it and giving it 3D cutscenes. Like I don't know if they want
a lot
do
of
that.
These game developers are not only interested in getting on the Switch platform, but are actively kicking themselves for not getting on the original Switch due to its mass popularity.
True. Another thing I'll mention as we tail off on this story too, there are a bunch of games that are supposed to be due out between now and the end of the fiscal year, which is the Switch is coming. Switch 2 is coming in the next fiscal year, so they're trying to cram a lot of the existing Switch titles kind of down our throats in the meantime. Metroid Prime 4 is supposed to be one of those, which I find very puzzling and confusing because we haven't heard a thing about it yet. But that's just a sidebar from me on Metroid Prime 4 because I am who I am. So yeah, Switch 2. What do you want to see? Hit us up at the handles we mentioned earlier in the episode. Let us know what tickles your fancy or what would tickle your fancy about a Switch 2. Or if you think the Switch is just going to roll with that for a while like me, it's really your call. So right now we'll go to break. As always, before we go to break, I would be remiss if I did not shout out our fantastic Patreon producer, Mr. Stephen Keller. Stephen was with us a couple weeks ago on the show. That was one of the many perks he received as part of his Patreon subscribership at the night level, which is the highest of our 3 levels of support. At the night level, you get access to the monthly secret segment and vlog, of course. You get the occasional guest spot, as Steven got. You get this producer shout out on every episode. And you get input into the weekly game segment, which I believe Techtic is hosting this week. There's also a Squire level of support, which gets you access to the monthly secret segment and vlog, and a page level, which gets you access to the monthly secret segment. So over at patreon.com/Online Warriors Podcast, you can check out the deets. You can say hi to us. You can say hi to Steven. You can join this community. You can consider supporting this show, which hopefully, if you're listening at this point, you like it because you've either listened to multiple episodes or you're halfway through the episode and you haven't shut it off yet. So thank you for sticking around. Thanks again to Steven. We'll be right back to talk about Gargoyles.
Do you love Marvel but are tired of hearing Cheeto-stained white guys talk about it?
Are you hoping to see the X-Men and Avengers face off?
Do you secretly want to be Jessica Jones or Daisy Johnson?
Or do you want to be with Valkyrie?
If so, you've found your new favorite podcast. We're your hosts, Madam Chris
and Madam Amy, and we are here to give you the commentary you want.
Marvel, minus the mansplaining.
Find us wherever you get your podcasts and visit us at themarvelousmadams.com.
Madams assemble.
All right, so Gargoyles. This was a game. First of all, this was a game. This was a game originally on the Sega, I think. So full disclosure, I'm just gonna kind of pull the curtain back on our process here. Techtic was like, we're gonna talk about Gargoyles, and I was like, okay. And I watched the trailer, and I was like, this has never made more sense to me that he wanted to talk about this. So Techtic, the floor is yours. I mean, side scroller, taking a game that was originally Sega Genesis game that was a 2D side-scrolling platformer with essentially 8-bit graphics or near to it, and making it look pretty. This is as up your alley as a game can get, I would think. But I'll let you tell me whether or not that's true.
Yeah. So this is their Gargoyles game, which is a game that was made off the animated series. It is not canon, so they were made in parallel. So you're not going to get a look behind on what the story was. Just go and watch the story. It's fantastic. It's on Disney Plus, just like a sidebar. But anyway, the side-scrolling Gargoyles is getting a remake that's coming to the Switch. It's not so much a remake as it's getting redone for the Switch, and they're adding some additional features like you can rewind so that if you kind of screw up an approach or like a platform jump and you just fall into the lava, hey, no big deal. Rewind, get that going again, and you'll ace the game and be all good to go. So yeah, side-scroller games are a medium that should never die, so more games being available to the Switch is really just gets me excited, and it's up my alley.
I think the coolest part about this, because I believe Disney did this as well with The Lion King, Aladdin, DuckTales, all of those, the ability to go back and forth instantly between like current graphics and old graphics is super cool.
Yeah.
But also, and this is probably showing my lack of skill in these types of games, the ability to save and then like rewind when you make a mistake and mess up, because I can't tell you how many times. So I'm going to take you back to like the 90s, right? And I'm just a little nerd bomber. And my mom brings me home The Lion King for the Sega Genesis.
She was a nerd firecracker at this point.
And I'm like, this is great. I love The Lion King. I'm a little kid. I love The Lion King. I get to, there's the I can't wait to be king level of The Lion King. And you have to jump on giraffes and monkeys and make sure you don't fall into the water, otherwise you die. And I very rarely made it past that and was very frustrated. Now, fast forward to, I don't know, whenever the Lion King game came out, again, remastered, I could rewind. And I actually was able to finish the game, and it was great. I loved it.
Yeah.
So making these games more accessible, 10 out of 10. I get that the solution is really to just like get good, but screw you. I want to be able to have fun and play the game.
There is no better place for a rewind feature. I totally agree. I think the rewind feature, whoever came up with that idea, it's brilliant, because there's no better place for it than platformers from this era, which if you haven't played, like, yeah, I've heard a lot about The Lion King. It looks like this game had this too. Even things like Donkey Kong Country. Like, if you haven't played those games, they are like the hardest games ever. And
so unforgiving.
Like dying in a shooter or something that has a lot of kind of trappings surrounding it. Like yes, it does feel bad, but it stings a lot more when you're playing some 8-bit thing where you have to make a long jump and you miss by a pixel. Like it's hard to get a redemption arc out of that. It's hard to get a good feeling out of that, even if you wind up making the jump later. So introducing a quick rewind feature, I think, is a really, really smart move. I did not know they had done that with The Lion King. I thought that was new for this game specifically, and I was going to laud this game for that addition. But yeah, any game of this ilk that's remastered should have that feature. It just seems like a no-brainer to me. And I've said this before on the podcast about many, many games that are remastered. Remasters in general, to me, are a no-brainer. I can't imagine game studios don't make oodles of money off of it because I don't want to say they're not doing as much work, but this game is fleshed out. Like there are certain things they're taking in there and they're adding to it, certainly, and they're improving the graphics, but the core gameplay, probably the core story, like it's done when you show up. I can't imagine that doesn't give you, a lot of good feelings when you're developing it, and probably makes the bottom line a little bit greener than it is red. So for me, it's always going to be a yes from me. I don't know that I'll play this game specifically, but I'm all aboard for the idea.
Can we talk about like how I feel like this IP should be revived in general?
Never watched the show.
Really?
Never watched the show.
It was super dark and gritty for a kid's show.
Do you recall the Batman animated series?
Batman Beyond?
No, prior to that.
Let me just say, I don't think I was as much of a Saturday morning cartoon person as Nerdbomber or certainly you.
Or the X-Men. So on the heels of the Batman animated series, these cartoons were kind of on this trend to move from a campy comedic thing to these dark brooding style shows. And so after the success of Batman, this show came out with the same dark undertones and was just taken by storm.
I certainly, at face value, not knowing basically anything about the show, I appreciate the concept. He's a gargoyle. I assume he comes to life at night and does stuff. Sold. Like, gargoyles look cool. They can be menacing. They have a lot of darkness surrounding them. I can appreciate the concept. But for me, that's the water's edge. If I were to play this game, it would be for the gameplay, probably not the story content. But as you said, it is on Disney Plus, so at some point. Maybe if I get bored, I'll look in that direction.
It's short. It got canceled too soon, so there's not too much to go through. So if you're ever, even like this is one of those shows where I feel like the last time I watched it, I was maybe like sick. And this is a while ago, like, I don't know, probably 5, maybe even 10 years ago. And I dug it up on like the internet at the time because I don't think Disney Plus was not a thing then. I think I just watched old episodes because it was just like, oh, dark and gritty. This is fun. Well, I had like the flu or something.
This release for this game, well timed for spooky season, 19th October of this year. So you have about a month to wait. Techtic, I don't think there's a price point for this yet. Is this a day one buy?
No, it is not.
Wow, surprised to hear, but
and my backlog is too deep. And if I'm being completely honest, I'm a big fan of playing the original games on the original console. So alternatively, I'll probably look into playing it on an older console and using the resurgence of this game as justification to spend the cash.
Yeah, so you're a purist is what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're a purist. I respect that. Well, 19th October for anyone who is interested in playing Gargoyles Remastered. This brings us to What Are You Up To Wednesday. Guys, I have been so excited for What Are You Up To Wednesday. This whole episode, I've been just clamoring to get to What Are You Up To Wednesday.
What are you up to Wednesday? Sorry,
something monumental has happened. Okay. For those that have listened to this show for really any amount of time, they know that a frequently occurring motif is Nerdbomber will provide me a suggestion for a game or a movie or a book or whatever, typically a game, and say, hey, you should really play this. And I take that suggestion / recommendation, I throw it in a garbage can and light it on fire, never to be seen or heard of again. Our more seasoned viewers will remember that she recently played a game called Inscryption that she recommended to me, probably with some real emphasis and for good reason. And I said, sure, maybe, as I always do. Well, I did play Inscryption. And in fact, in the past couple weeks, I missed last week's episode, as you probably know. I have played it from start to finish. Not that it's a very long game, but I bought it on a whim for, I think, like $12 on the Switch eShop. Played through the whole thing. It is magnificent. It's hard for me to call it my game of the year because it's not very recent, I don't think. But it's my personal game of the year at this point. It pales.
You love to hear it.
Everything else seems to pale in comparison to the experience I had with this game. It's incredibly unique. It scratches a lot of itches for me. It has puzzle elements. It has a deck building element. Nerdbomber really hit the nail on the head with this one. She deserves all the credit in the world. I can't really say much more about it without taking things to spoiler town because it is a very meta-fictional experience. So I will kind of leave the listener to, if they are interested, go and buy this. I also, as I've often done on the show, want to shout out the Switch eShop because this cost $12 and it was like incredible. And I just bought another game for $10 that I expect I'll also get a lot of play out of. So Switch eShop, you're doing a good thing. I guess that's all I'm going to say. I've been playing that. The other thing I wanted to shout out in my update this week is a book called Moonflower Murders. And if it sounds similar to the last book I read, Magpie Murders, it's because it's by the same author and it's part of the same series. And it's still good. So I'm really on my mystery kick. I'm staying there. I intend to stay there. I have other books lined up behind this one that are all going to be whodunits. And yeah, I don't want to say anything specific about it because it may be a spoiler to do so. But really enjoying that as well.
I'm just Googling this now. Did you know that they're making I want to say this is TV, not a movie adaptation. Yeah, PBS and BBC are making an adaptation of Moonflower Murders.
I did not. I know that there is a Magpie Murders adaptation, which I may watch. I haven't yet. I also Moonflower Murders is referencing a lot of things that happened in Magpie Murders, so I definitely want to try and finish out this series. I think it's a 2-book series. I think it's done. I don't know for sure. But yeah, I may circle back and watch those shows. Not that I've watched many BBC shows, but my single experience with them, which was Sherlock, was pretty positive. So yeah, I have some intention of going back and looking at that. But I was not aware that Moonflower Murders also had a series. So good to know. I don't think I've watched anything of note recently. I mean, I'm continuing through Only Murders in the Building and also in season 7 of ER, which continues to be absolutely phenomenal. For the time being, I think I'll leave it at that, and I will throw things over to my gal Nerdbomber to continue taking us through What Are You Up To Wednesday.
All right, so one of the biggest things, if anybody knows me, I have been wanting to watch Marcel the Shell with Shoes On for a very long time. And I've been waiting for it anxiously to come to streaming. And finally, I just bit the bullet and we rented it. And oh my God, this was amazing. We literally watched it last night.
This is a movie, and I'm sorry to bring up Rotten Tomatoes again, but this movie has a 98%. I remember when this movie came out, on Rotten Tomatoes, 98% certified fresh on 193 reviews, pretty much universally beloved.
Yes.
And it sounds like for good reason.
Now, are you familiar, and I know Techtic is already, but are you familiar with the YouTube series that was created by Dean Fleischer-Camp and Jenny Slate?
I have never watched it. I am familiar with the concept, but I've never watched any of it.
Okay, well, this is basically, if you're not familiar, the YouTube series was a bunch of shorts about this little shell with a googly eye who also had shoes on, and it was just very cute, campy stuff. And Marcel always had like insights about the world that were just like very wholesome and touching. And so they expanded it in 2021. They made a longer form mockumentary about Marcel the Shell. And, you know, it's all very like stop motion on live action backgrounds. Fantastic. The story is essentially that Marcel the Shell with shoes on, he and his grandmother have been left alone because the rest of his family was forcibly removed from their home when the humans that lived in their house got divorced. You know, the majority of them got packed up unwillingly. And, you know, he's just been there then with his grandmother, longing for his family, but, you know, making do just the two of them. And then Dean, who is a filmmaker, is going through his own divorce and moves into this Airbnb because the house Marcel lives in is being rented out as an Airbnb. And he forms a friendship with Marcel and then starts, you know, documenting him, putting him on YouTube, kind of like, you know, calling back to when he became popular on YouTube back in the day, but more fleshing out his story then and showing what happens to Marcel and giving him a little bit more of a story. And when I tell you that this movie had me in literal tears over a fake shell, like, it is uplifting and emotional and very insightful about the world and life and loss and, you know, dealing with the idea that, you know, the world is bigger than our little bubbles typically are and how we connect with people and the internet. It was just such an insightful, wholesome movie. I would recommend everybody go watch this. And for people who are not familiar with Marcel the Shell, they're probably going to watch a trailer and be like, why would I want to watch a 90-minute movie about this stop motion shell? But just, you got to do it. It seems stupid at first, but you just got to do it.
And it's a little slow to kind of get off the ground.
You should.
But, well, I'm talking just from a, you know, not a super Marcel the Shell fangirl standpoint. If you're just watching the movie and you have kind of no background of this, just bear with it the first 20 minutes and then it really takes off. That's just my one piece of advice.
Like, this is probably one of
the
better movies that I've watched in a really long time. And I mean, it's A24, not a huge surprise here. A24 is also awesome because I think weren't they one of the only studios so far to agree to the new SAG-AFTRA contract stuff? So
I think I think they're kind of just flying over all of it somehow. But yeah, they're paying people. Like, it's they are doing right by people. And yeah, like you said, I think they're the only one. So yeah, shout out to A24.
If for that reason alone, definitely go watch this movie. It was fantastic. I'm sorry if you also end up sobbing over a little fake shell. But yeah, I am obsessed again. I've been obsessed with Marcel the Shell, but like I was looking up, I was like, ooh, maybe I need a Marcel the Shell mug. Maybe I need a Marcel the Shell t-shirt. Like, here we go, Marcel. So it's like one of the most heartwarming, like, feel-good movies that I've watched in a while.
Sweet. Anything else to update us on, or are we swinging over to T-Dog?
I mean, that was the main update. I'm still playing Detective Pikachu, working my way through that. I have Starfield downloaded on my Xbox, but I have not started that yet. I feel like once I get into that, it's going to eat my life. So I've been waiting and holding off a little bit. When the weather gets crappier and I have a little bit more time, I will probably be in that world forever.
I think that's a really good plan based on what I've heard about Starfield and yeah, how we've talked about how deep it is. So yeah, Techtic, you want to close us out here?
Yeah. So we finished the Afterparty. I want to give props to Nerdbomber. She accurately figured it out before we knew who it was.
Season 1 or season 2?
Season 2.
It's actually, my secret segment for last month was about the Afterparty and about how I did not care for it. But go on.
Okay, well, that's your own issues. But yeah, we enjoyed it. Yeah. We enjoyed it very much.
I didn't watch your secret segment, and now I feel like I have to watch it so I can be sad.
I mean, that's your decision. I don't know. I gave it a 3-episode shake, and it wasn't doing it for me. I appreciated the concept, but I wasn't jiving with it.
I do think this season is a little bit better. But
you didn't finish? You're a psychopath. Anyway, so we finished that, enjoyed it. It's always a good time. It's a great show to watch. Illeagle has no taste. And then the other thing is...
That's true.
I started Those of you who follow our YouTube channel, you know every now and then I sprinkle in a DIY project, and I've kind of just fallen off the wagon on that as a whole. And the only thing that I am consistent with is coming up with a Halloween gadget that I make myself. And so I have started my plans with a Halloween gadget and got this little $30 like mini projector. It's kind of amazing. It's like about the cross-sectional area of a cell phone, but it's thicker. But like that's very small for a projector, and the quality is pretty good. I'm thinking of doing something where I either project my face or make some kind of decorations come to life on their face. Like they'll be blank, and then their face will be just a projected movie, little animated thing. So something along that vein. But at this time, I'm just kind of playing around with its capabilities and TBD. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, your face is scary.
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah.
I'm kidding, man. Your face is great.
And with that, I'll save some other stuff for next week.
So that means it's time for you to take us to Quiz Town. You're the quiz conductor today. Let me update on the records before we get into it. Techtic, you're the top dog, my friend. 9-8. Nerdbomber 8-10. Your boy Illeagle 86 8-11. Steven 3-1. Congrats to Steven. That's a solid record. So what this means is that Nerdbomber and myself this week are playing for second place and to avoid the dreaded punishment. So I'm invested. I mean, I always am, but more so this week.
We're getting close to the end of the year, guys. Where did the time go?
It's coming up.
So interestingly enough, the topic is actually gargoyles as well. So we're getting a double header on what the gargoyles content is for this.
Which week. I've previously mentioned that I know nothing about. So let me just hedge a little bit before we begin.
I mean, to be fair, even though I know about the show, I would have no idea what the statistics are. So.
Oh yeah, this has literally benefited me in the past. In fact, I think the last time I won, it was something I knew nothing about. So, I'm game.
All right. So then I'm just going to throw it out there. I don't remember who goes first, but the first question is: when did Gargoyles the animated series first air?
It would be Nerdbomber. Her record is better.
I think it's going to be 1988. Just swing in here.
No, it's later than that. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my +1 immediately. 1989.
Hat out the kitchen.
So Illegally uses his +1 to great avail. The Gargoyles animated series aired October 24th, 1994, and ran till February 15th, 1997. Within that window, how many episodes were there?
Very few. 24.
I'll go ahead and use my +1 here, 25. Because I think it was only on for a couple seasons, but I feel like they were long-ish seasons.
So there was a total of 78 half-hour episodes produced. The first season had 13 episodes. The last season had 13 episodes. And the second season ran for a total of 52 episodes. That is where the meat of the lore was contained.
Well, I mean, back in the day, a lot of the animated shows and even like sitcoms, seasons were super long. Like they
would have at least 20 episodes.
Yeah, we're so used to them having like 10 episodes max now, but it used to be like triple, sometimes, obviously. What is 5 times the number? Is there a word for that? I don't know.
The standard for hour-long shows back in the day was like 24 or 25 episodes. So, yeah, not so much anymore. But yeah, so we both +1, and it's now that we have a clean slate 3-question quiz.
Okay, so now we're going to get into a little bit of facts about gargoyles themselves. So if you didn't know, gargoyles were actually used as a decorative piece to channel the flow of water off of rooftops. There was plumbing inside of these bad boys. When were they first used this way?
This was like Gothic times. I don't know when that time period was. 1200.
It's an extremely strong guess. It's actually the number I was thinking of. I'm going to go earlier and say 900, because I think it's somewhere in there.
So the first appearance was between 1200 and 1220 AD.
What?
Nerdbomber takes this one. And the reason why I clarified using them as to flow water, because technically the definition of gargoyle is a large statue. And those can be taken way, 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 way back into history.
Well, I mean, I couldn't have done anything, so...
The fact that I literally pulled the Gothic era out of my booty hole, incredible.
Her booty hole's pretty Gothic.
That's true. Okay, well, the pressure's on me now.
So a famous fixture containing gargoyles is the Notre Dame Cathedral in France. How many gargoyles are on this cathedral? And I'm talking originally. So like...
I appreciate this question.
So like we're not going to do, oh, well, there's like this many left because of erosion and stuff.
I mean, Notre Dame, or Notre Dame, if you want to get French with it, it's a sizable building. I'm good. 24. I'm going 24 again. I used that answer and it didn't work, but I'm going to use it again.
Well, so it has like multiple spires and it's a big building. And I feel like they were not only just on corners, but I feel like they were like sprinkled throughout and on different levels as well. I'm gonna swing for the fences here. I'm gonna say 40.
Currently, there are 39 remaining lion-headed water drains in the Temple of Zeus. Originally, there were 102 populating the temple's gutters, and so Nerdbomber takes this one.
Wow.
You damn it.
And she takes
you damn
it
way too early. You got to let me finish
when
my
you
sentence.
said 39, my heart just sunk. I was like, are you kidding me? But here we are. Does this mean I win?
I have lost. Yeah, I've lost, but let's wrap things up here with the final question so I can see if I can redeem some dignity.
How big is the largest gargoyle in the world?
In what units?
Bomber, you go first.
In feet.
I feel like these bad boys have to be pretty big. I'm going to say the biggest one was like 15 feet.
Bigger than that, 30 feet. Just double it.
All right, so Illeagle bust. The largest one is found in Japan. It was actually made by like modern times, which is like, it feels like cheating, but whatever. It was made in 2005, and it's 29 feet, 6 inches tall.
Wow.
So I was 6 inches off. Are you serious?
Yeah.
That's booty cheeks. I mean, it doesn't really matter, I guess, but that's still upsetting. Okay, well, Nerdbomber moves to 9 and 10. I moved to 8 and 12. Punishment is a real possibility for me at this point, which I don't love, but there's a whole lot of year left. So I said I didn't know anything about gargoyles, and it turns out that I was basically correct. We thank you all for showing up, spending some time with us, listening to this show. If you want to head over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a review there. We would appreciate it. Whether it's good or it's bad, it gives us something to operate on. Have a great week. Have a great start to the fall season, and stay safe and keep on podcasting.